Hello and welcome to the TruGolf Academy. You've joined me, Jon Watts at Drayton Park Golf Club. Today I'm in my swing studio and I'm going to be talking about what the lead wrist, so for me as a right-handed player, my left wrist should be doing in the downswing, and the role of the hands into impact as well. The first part of this, and please do check it out, was about the lead wrist in the backswing. So it was about my preference, and it was about the difference between a bowed left wrist, what club face position that will give us, potential ball flight, a cut left wrist, and for my preference of this flat left wrist. I went on to points of how you would achieve that, how it's affected. What I'm going to go on to today is really talking about the role of the hands in the downswing, really focusing on this lead wrist. So for me, as I said, my left wrist, for a left-handed golfer, that would be your right wrist. As we make that initial transition from the top of the backswing to the start of the downswing, and the movement pattern they're making through impact. It's quite an in-depth video, this one, so please bear with me. I'll try and cover the main topics or the main subjects a few times in there. It's a really important part for you to start to understand, as this has the ultimate control over the club face through impact. So, I'm going to just get to the top of my backswing. And my preference at the top of the backswing was for a relatively flat left wrist, quite a neutral left wrist, as that will give me a leading edge where it's about the same angle as my left arm. There are good players with more cupping in their left wrist. There are good players with more of a bowed left wrist, generally having a closed club face. There's more than one way of doing these things. And as I said in the first video, it's only a fault if it's causing a deviation with the ball flight. So if you've got a closed club face and your bad shots are going too far to the left of target, that's something to look at. If your bad one is an open club face, you've got more of a cup wrist, and you're hitting them out to the right for a right-handed player, again, that needs looking at. But remember, we're not trying to build the perfect model golf swing. We're trying to make an effective impact. So it's only a fault if it causes a deviation with the ball flight. So from our wrist position at the top of the backswing, what I really want to start to see, what I see with the majority of elite golfers, whichever of the three wrist positions they're in at the top, my preference again for this pretty flat neutral left wrist is our left wrist will go a little bit into flexion. So it's either flat or it's maybe just got a little bit of extension in that wrist, as a lot of good players have just a slight cupping in their left wrist, in their lead wrist in the backswing. But what happens at the start of the downswing is actually there's a little bit of that movement. We call it the flexion of that lead wrist, that left wrist. And what that has the effect of doing is allowing the club to drop behind me. So I'm not pulling down my arms, but the club shaft is shallowing on the downswing. And that's what you'll see with the majority of elite golfers. So there's a movement from a slight bit of extension in the lead wrist to definitely a little bit of flexion in that left wrist, which allows that club to actually lay down more behind me on the downswing. And from there, it's really the role of the body, how it moves up into impact and is rotating around to the left, that will square the club face. So what you'll find with the elite golfers is they're not really using a lot of hands. They're not creating a lot of what we call flash speed, so releasing with the hands and arms. It's very much from the pivot of the body. So I'm going to put a couple of links in this video. The first one's just going to be to the first video I did about the lead wrist in the backswing. And the second video is talking about that transition, so the role of the lower body in the downswing. I'm not going to touch on that today. I'm really, as I said, we're going to be focusing more on the hands. So what we see with the elite golfers is there's that little bit of flat flexion in the left wrist, allowing that club to shallow on the downswing, all the way to last parallel, which is where the club is last parallel to the ground. From this position, my lower body is actually moving up and turning to the left. And the role of the hands, and this is the really important bit, and the bit that's really misunderstood from amateur golfers, is your hands from last parallel here are actually moving upwards into impact. So if we could look at what the hands are doing 3D, they're actually moving up and around to the left. Okay, so they're moving up into impact and round to the left. For me as a right-handed golfer. So many golfers are getting told things like keep your head down, terrible swing thought, keep your left arm dead straight. Well, a lot of us can't. maybe because of tightness in the upper spine. And they're also being told to be hitting down on the golf ball. Well, the club is actually moving downwards, but my hands aren't. So my hands reach their lowest point at the last parallel pre-impact, and they're actually moving upwards. And the link, as I said, to the video I'm going to put in here is the roll of the hips and how they're actually rising into impact to stop this flip, stop this hand action through impact. What we see with the best golfers out there, definitely the best drivers of the ball, Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, they're creating huge club head speed, but they've actually got the slowest rates of closure. So they're not creating huge hand speed. Believe it or not, a lot of mid-high handicap golfers, in fact most, are actually creating a lot more hand speed. Okay, so they're creating high club head speed, but they're not creating high hand speed through impact. They're not having to rely on their hands. They're actually allowing, Dustin Johnson is more into this bowed left wrist, this closed club face, so his left wrist is already in flexion, and he's really just using that body to try and square the club face and almost holding the shot off rather than actually having to flip at it with his hands. So from a face-on position, you'll see that my wrist goes into a little bit of flexion here on the downswing to allow that club shaft to shallow to last parallel. It's now my lower body moving up and round to the left that's allowing my hands to rise. Okay, and my left wrist is going from flexion to extension, but it's happening at or just after impact. It's not happening pre-impact. Okay, so it's not happening before the golf ball. My left wrist, my lead wrist, is moving a little bit into flexion, so that's that bowing movement here on the downswing, and it is going to extend. Okay, it is going to go into extension, but it's at what point? It should be after impact. The exercise I want you to do to get the feeling of this is make me a backswing. Stop at the top. Allow that lead wrist to move a little bit into flexion to last parallel, and from there I just want you to focus on the hands and the hips moving up and left. So clearing. So top of the backswing, a little bit of bowing in that left wrist, a little bit of a flexion there, and now up and to the left. Oh. Let me try that again. My launch monitor missed that one. Let me try one more shot so hopefully we can see the numbers on that. I'd expect to just see a sort of push draw pattern, something starting right, moving a little left. Stop at the top, flexion of the left wrist to allow that club shaft to shallow, and now up and to the left. Oh. Bear with me, let's just try one more. That's the move, and then up. Good. That was a very neutral ball flight. Didn't draw, but I'm very happy with the flight of it. Started right to target and just stayed there. Let's look at the numbers on it quickly. I'm not overly worried about the distance. So my hands were moving upwards. I definitely felt that, but the club is actually still swinging downwards. That's about tour average, 4 degrees on the way down. I had a nice in to out swing path, pretty good strike. I just left the club face a little bit open. That's not really an issue, so that was more of a push out to the right of the target, but you can definitely see there in that slow mode that my hands and the hips are moving up and to the left, yet the club is actually still moving down. The centre of gravity of the golf club's moving down. I know there's a lot to take in there in that video, but understanding what the hands are doing is really going to help you control your club face at impact. Please do post some comments and questions below. I'd love to get around to answering some of those. Do check out the other video about the lead wrist in the backswing. That's going to help. And check us out on all our social media. All the data, all the info you need is coming along the bottom of the screen now. Thanks guys, see you next time.